Welcome, everybody. I'm Angie Abdu, the chair of the Writer in Residence Committee. I come to you from the beautiful land of the Ktunaxa people. I've been lucky in my many years in this territory to become friends with many Ktunaxa people and learn about their language, their culture, and their history, and even to observe and participate in some of their cultural and governing practices. I will continue in my own small way to continue to do what I can to remember the harm done in the past and to attempt to find a better way forward. In this dispersed environment, I invite you all to share your own land acknowledgement in the chat if you feel so inclined to do so. Before I introduce today's star, I'd like to welcome Dean Manajay Manani to say a few words on behalf of the FHSS. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Angie, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm joining our session today, beautiful session today from 3D6 territory in Southwest Edmonton. And thank you very much, Angie, for your meaningful territorial acknowledgement. I too welcome everyone to use the chat function to acknowledge the lands that they are joining this meeting from. It is my great pleasure to welcome Bertrand again to the faculty for his second presentation. It's such an honor, Bertrand, to be hosting you as our 2025 Writer in Residence. So warm welcome again to you on behalf of the faculty. I also want to take this opportunity to thank our Writer in Residence Committee again for the amazing work that they do each year. Our Writer in Residence Committee and our Writer in Residence Committee Chair, Angie Abdu. I'm also extending my thanks to Joanna Manchur, who's been working a lot behind the scenes as our communication officers in university relations, making this presentation happen. So thanks again to everyone who made time to join the presentation today. And I don't want to take up too much time. I'll pass it over back to Angie now. Thank you.
Okay. And I just want to say that you are all muted and your cameras are off, but feel welcome to chat in the chat. I will be monitoring that. And at the end, we'll have a Q&A session and I will read out questions to Bertrand. And I want to second Manajay's thank you to Joanna. I very, very much appreciate all the technical support during this whole process. So many of you have had the opportunity to meet Bertrand Bickersteth, and I've had a fairly constant stream of emails from aspiring writers expressing their gratitude for this program, and especially for the great consideration and generosity they've received from Bertrand. I know he's worked with many people on manuscripts at various stages, and they've all commented on his intelligence and insights. For those of you who have not met him, before he speaks, I'll just tell you a little bit about him. Bertrand is a poet, a playwright, an essayist, and an educator. Most recently, he comes to us from Olds College, where he's on a break to do this writer in residence position. He was born in Sierra Leone and raised in Alberta. His debut collection of poetry, called The Response of Weeds, came out in 2020. It won the Gerald Lampert Award from the League of Canadian Poets. That's an award recognizing the best debut poetry book in the country. It also won the 2021 High Plains Award in the same category. That is an international award that covers the Canadian Prairie provinces and extends into the US. So congratulations, what a great debut. And that book was also shortlisted for other awards throughout Calgary and the province of Alberta. Reviewers called the book striking and evocative, excellent and exquisite, vigorous and erudite. Currently, including in our time with us, Bertrand has been working on a collection about Black cowboys in Western Canada. It is my pleasure to welcome Bertrand Bickersteth.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Angie, for that introduction. Lovely introduction. I want to thank everyone for your patience. You know how it is these days. Technology will do what technology does, and that's just what happened. I find this whole experience of being the writer in residence is so fulfilling and so enjoyable over the last year. I can't believe that we're in April, at the end of April already. It's been such an honor to have filled this role, to interact with the students. You're all fantastic. I love you so much. Keep on sending me your stuff. Keep on talking to me. Remember, we're connected now, as well as Angie yourself, just for connecting with me and staying connected with me and guiding me through everything. You've been a great support and a great help for me. And Joanna, of course, in so many different ways, you have been excellent support and help for me as well. So I appreciate all that is the Athabasca University that has been enabling me to do this role. I really do appreciate that. Thank you. I am coming to you from the Treaty 7 territory in Mohkinstsis, which is colonially known as Calgary. And out here we have the land has been shepherded and stewarded by Blackfoot Confederacy, Tsutinas, and the Stoney Nakoda. And I feel a special historical bond to each of these groups, as in my research, I've often discovered connections between Black figures in history and each one of these groups. And so I often think of my gratitude, my acknowledgement in that way. So today I'm going to be giving a talk. It's part 2 of my first talk. And we haven't practiced this yet, so I'm hoping sharing the screen is going to work properly. But this is going to be kind of the next step from the first talk that I gave, which described, in fact, I'll talk to you about it in a moment, but it's described the course towards creating this Black cowboy poetry. Let me just see about, wow, I don't even see share. Where is, oh, there it is. Okay, everything's just a little different. Oh, I can do it from a tab. That's awesome. I think I'll try that. Let's try this one here. See if that works. All right, folks, you tell me if you are able to see it, because I don't know if you will see it or not.
Huh. Yeah, we can see it, Bertrand. That's great.
You can see it? Okay, great. Now, I think, there we go. All right, I think we're all ready to go now. Okay, so this is called Numinous Animal, and it's actually changed quite a bit from when I first suggested this talk. But the description, I think, works well still. The only thing that doesn't really work is the title. So just ignore Numinous Animal at this point. But you can focus on the subtitle, which is How I Fight History with Poetry. And I think that is what this talk is, all right? Now, another subtitle, the subtitle that I could give you could also be How I, oh, it didn't change. Why didn't that go? There we go. How I Became a Thief. And this is a longer story, but it's also connected to everything I want to talk about in terms of history and poetry. All right, now I'm going to get there, but in order for me to get there, I just want to remind you of, oh, why is my stuff not changing here? Did you guys see the screen change? Or is it still on my How I Became a Thief slide?
Yep. Yeah, it changed for us.
It changed. Okay.
I see slide number 3.
Okay. All right. That's actually not working the way that I wanted it to. So I'm going to, let's do, oh, there we go. All right. Okay. My poetry project is on Black cowboys. So as you know, that's what I've been working on all year long. And so what I will do is I'm going to describe, or I'm going to get to the whole thievery via this story. But I just want to first remind you of how we got here. And that is through my first talk, The Forge of Forgetting. So this is where I discussed Black cowboys, the history of Black cowboys. I talked a little bit about the challenges of researching Black history, in particular with respect to Black cowboys. And then I shared with you some of my poetry that is based on historic Black cattle brands that I have discovered or uncovered, and ended by sharing the news that I'm using those cattle brands as a way of designing and creating a font that can be used out in the world. So what I wanted to do here is just talk a little bit about the process of creating that font, and then through a kind of, can we say, winding cattle trail, get to the story of how I became a thief, and how that helps to show poetry versus history. So this is the basic process of making a font from a brand. It begins, and I got to tell you, this is all very condensed version. There's so many details to this, but I really didn't want to make this a talk about how to use Adobe Illustrator. Some of you out there are probably thrilled by that kind of talk, but most of us, including me, are not. And so I'll just condense it here into 2 quick slides, and then we'll move on from there. So it begins with finding the cattle brand. That's like years of research, and I find it. And then I capture that on a screen, and then I load that into Adobe Illustrator. And from there, I isolate the letter that I want to, or the symbol that I want to use, and I trace it using Adobe Illustrator. I lift that trace from the original, and then I have to play around with it to clean it up and to make it vector ready so that it can be plugged into the next stage. So the next point is it gets added to my growing catalog of letters that I am creating. And maybe, I don't know if you can see this at this point, but you can see some cleanup has already happened with the W. I mean, it's a wonky W. Let's make no bones about it. It's wonky. But I kind of like that. Not even kind of. I really like that, because I want this font to demonstrate the imperfection of the cattle brand. I want that to be visible in the font. So I know there are typographers out there who would be horrified at the lack of symmetry and the wonkiness, but I really do want to preserve that. So anyway, I add that to my growing collection of letters. And then all of my letters get put into Inkscape. And Inkscape is open software that creates the font file. So it takes the vector file, which is, vector is just an image file. It's it's just an image file. And it translates that into a font file, into an SVG font file. And then from Inkscape, it gets dumped into another piece of software, which is called FontForge. And FontForge changes the SVG font file into something that every computer can recognize as a font. So essentially, this is the stage that shifts it from my computer to everyone else's in the world. You can plug it into word processors and texting and all that sort of thing. And so at that point, then we have got a font that now can be used out into the world. And as I like to say, this is Black historicizing for the modern world. Okay, so now you will be able to, if you want to, download it and use it in your texting or your essay writing or whatever. You'll have that historic black cattle brand as your font. That I think is pretty cool, and a lot of other people thought it was pretty cool as well. This guy thinks it's pretty cool, and I tried to impress him before I impress everyone else. So I know if he's impressed, then I'm on to something for sure. So that is that step of the font making. But what I want to talk about now is the idea of making the cattle brands into fonts, because this is something people regularly ask me about. How did I think of this? Like, you're a poet, what made you think of trying to create a font? And I almost wish I hadn't, because it's taking forever. Like, it's a slow process. For example, I'm going back now to this process slide. This first step here of locating a black cattle brand, when did I locate? This is Benjamin Washington's brand. That was probably 2015 or 2016 that I located that. So, 10 years ago. Working in Adobe Illustrator, this is iteration 2 of that, because I started on another program, Openware, which was called GIMP. And that took me like a year to even figure out, because they don't give you instructions in Openware. And it was not intuitive at all. It was very difficult. And so then I flipped to Adobe Illustrator, thinking that it would be much easier on an established program. Well, it wasn't. It still took me at least a year to figure out how to use this. But finally, I'm able to trace it. So it took me almost 2 years to figure out how to trace a brand adequately. And then not very long after that to clean it up to the stage that you see on the bottom, maybe a few months, you know. So from cattle brand to this stage, which is not even the font yet, you know, 9 years, 7 months, 4 days. What's that Prince song? 7 years, 15 days, 13 hours, whatever. Okay, a long time, basically, a long time. All right. But I think it's worth it. Yeah, because it is an amazing idea. And it's not how my brain works for sure. I'm into language and, you know, playing with words and that sort of thing. I don't have the software programming symmetrical visual brain. I do not have that. And so it's been quite a labor for me. Nevertheless, I came to this idea through, well, a number of ways, but it really begins with the 1980s. That's really where we have to start. All right. So what a time, the 80s. Oh, yes. I was a teenager in the 80s. That's how old I am. And just looking at these images are bringing back some crazy memories. Look at that, supersonic. Fantastic. Now, looking at George Michael over on the right, I shouldn't get distracted by these images, but, you know, I'm just looking at him dancing away. And I remember how we thought he was like the epitome of like manhood, and, you know, all the girls wanted him and all the guys wanted to be like him. And like, how did we not know? I mean, look at that. It's incredible, right? Anyway, I love the energy now. And I'm so glad that George Michael was able to be who he could be eventually. But incredible, the 80s, what a time, what a time. The 80s were dominated by brands, folks. Okay, and so we had brands like this, Polo, Ralph Lauren. We were wearing that. We were wearing Levi's 501 jeans, big deal. We were wearing Sperry topsiders, also big deal. And essentially all of these things were kind of meant to add up to make you into something like this guy, right? Tom Cruise from Risky Business. So all the guys wanted to be Tom Cruise, and, you know, apparently most of the women anyway wanted to date Tom Cruise. But this was what all the brands were kind of gearing us up to be. We're supposed to be this guy. I couldn't be this guy. Like I couldn't be, right? This guy wasn't part of my tribe. In fact, one of the things that I did struggle with, particularly when I was in high school, was who was my tribe? I didn't have a tribe, right? Now, I don't mean by that I didn't have friends or, you know, I was disliked, because I was very liked. I had a lot of friends. I was often in the in-group, in fact. It's just that I didn't fit in with the categories that we were given. So of these categories you see here, jocks, headbangers, goths, and geeks, and preps, I've put the jocks and preps in, highlighted them in blue color, because those are the ones that I tended to be more associated, or most associated with. Even though I didn't really fit in with them. I was associated with jocks because I was athletic. And frankly, as a Black person, all of the coaches were really busy recruiting me as often as they could. It's the first thing they did when they saw me. And so I was on all the teams. And I didn't even like sports, to be honest. I didn't know I didn't like sports back then because I was constantly being rewarded for being an athlete. But I didn't like sports, and I didn't belong to the jock world. I wasn't in their world. I definitely wasn't a headbanger, goth, or geek, for sure not. But I kind of flirted with those worlds, to be honest, mainly through music. So I happened to be into prog rock at that time. And there's still a side of me that, well, I'm not really into it anymore, but there's a side of me that is kind of enjoys thinking about music. And that side of me, so today, really jazz and hip hop is my thing, really. These days, it's all I listen to mostly. But the jazz side of me probably emerged from all that progressive rock that I was listening to back then. So some of the headbangers were like, hey, you're listening to Rush, and are you one of us? No, you're not, right? And same thing with the goths, right? I mean, I wasn't into anything that they were into, but they loved Morrissey and The Cure and British culture in general, they loved. And I happened to have access to British culture through my parents. You might recall that from my first talk. And so I knew all these references that they were busy learning. And they thought, wow, this kid, are you one of us? No, and also not one. And even the geeks, I will say, to the extent that what we called geeks back then were really just brainy people. They were smart. I mean, I tend to be intellectual, and that is something that has always been part of my identity. It's just that being Black didn't allow me to be intellectual. There were no models for a Black intellect when I was in high school. So occasionally a geek would like fire off a pretty good zinger at a jock or something like that, maybe correcting their grammar or something like that. And I would laugh, right? And for a moment, we'd look at each other like, oh, are you one of us? But no, again, no. And the thing with the preps is, it's just that I went to Alboya and Western. And frankly, in the 80s in those two schools, preppy culture dominated. And so most of my friends either aspired to or were preppy. And so I kind of was associated with them. But again, I really was not of them. I did not have a group. That's basically what it comes down to. Okay, I did not have a group. And as much as I was, close to the preps, if there was any doubt that I could not belong to them, we only need to look at Carleton, right? I mean, this is the proof. There's really no such thing as a Black prep because that was Carleton. And so if there is such a thing as a Black prep, then it's laughable, right? It's hilarious. It's a joke. It's not anything to take serious. And so that was definitely not for me, right? And it wasn't. It was never for me. But there were some images that did seem concretely for me. And I don't know how well you can see this one, but this is an image. It's a still shot taken from Dirty Harry, the Clint Eastwood movie, which was very popular amongst my male friends in the 80s. They loved this movie and they were quoting from it all the time. This is a famous scene in which Dirty Harry is pointing his gun at one of the what do I call him? I'll call him a ruffian for now. How about that? Yeah, Shakespearean term. He's pointing his gun at one of the ruffians and who has a hostage, as you can see here. And he says to him, go ahead, make my day, right? Do something. Let me shoot you. So the thing about Dirty Harry is that he was a cop, but he was like a bad cop. And I think what the director of the movie was doing was signaling to the world that even though Dirty Harry is a bad cop, let's not mistaken him for the villain. He's still the hero. And the way to signal that is to make sure that he has to blow away a few actual villains. And so even though in the movie, the central villain actually isn't Black in this movie, the incidental villains, the incidental criminals are all Black. And this just sort of sets the stage for Harry's heroism. Okay, and so without the audience having to think, we're never going to get confused about who Harry is, even though he's walking around with his gun shooting people and doing all kinds of criminal things. We're not going to be confused with him because we know who the actual criminals are because he takes those people down. Yeah. Now, this scene is quite striking because it's taken place in a diner. And there are about 4 or 5 Black people who are, they're all Black men. They've taken over this diner and they're going to rob it. And they go through all kinds of the signals of criminality. Yeah. Now, as I said, this was a very popular movie in the 80s. And my friends loved this movie. And they were always quoting from it. They never mentioned, I mean, they talked about this scene often, but they didn't seem to feel the confusion or dismay that I felt when I read it and when I saw it. And honestly, it was confusing for me because I wanted to like it like my friends. But I, of course, got mixed messages. I got more than one message from this scene. The scene worked for them, obviously. The scene was sending more than one message to me. Now, this is the confirmation of what I was being shown of what Blackness or how Blackness was being branded in the 80s. So you can be a criminal you can be a rapist, you can be a murderer. And by the way, that's all of the things that were being demonstrated by these Black men in this particular diner. And yeah, all of this, they were robbing a diner is what they were doing. And all of this is to demonstrate criminality, rape, murder, all of that was conveyed in this one little sign, in this one little scene. So you might think, wow, that's a lot just to rob a diner. But as I said, the purpose was really to demonstrate Harry's heroism. But again, for me, this was the concrete brand of Blackness that I could recognize and that I could see around me was being recognized. Ironically, this is when I felt most seen. So I didn't have a group. I wasn't a jock or a goth or a geek or a prep. I wasn't a thief, but I felt most seen when I was recognized in this way. Now, you might ask yourself, well, why were you recognized in this way? That seems ridiculous. It's because that recognition was just on the social level. It was just everywhere. Yeah. The general white perspective understood in the way that I told you in that movie, they understood seeing those Black men as criminals. They understood that, oh yeah, Harry is the hero because there are the true criminals over there. Nobody had to sit them down and explain it or anything like that. The image was instantaneously understandable by them. So because they could see my potentiality as a thief as being logical, that in a weird way actually clarified some of my confusions and self-doubt about my identity. It was the one area that I could see clarity in which I didn't have doubt. And so I became a thief. It started one day when one of my friends showed up, white friend, showed up, all my friends were white in the 80s, showed up and opened up his backpack and showed me that he had like 5 or 6 bottles of cologne in it. Again, Polo, Ralph Lauren, Polo, cologne. He gave me one and then he went and like sold the others. And I was like, what, where did you? And he's like, oh yeah, I just lifted those. And for whatever reason, that just clicked something into place in my mind. Just clicked it into place. Now, I think that much more was going on than just this particular friend. There are all the things that I've already told you about being seen, not being seen, having a group, not having a group, the way in which the world was already branding me, and my confusion and frustration. And I think there was a part of me that felt a relief in being able to step into a recognizable role. And so I did at the age of 15. Now, I know you folks want to hear much more about that particular story, but I'm sorry to say I'm going to do a hard pivot right now. There's nothing really surprising to tell you or to reveal about that story. That story ends exactly how you would imagine it ends, okay? One day I'm caught, I'm pulled into the back room of the bay, the security guards show up, they call the police, my parents come in, that whole tragedy happened, all right? But that's not the actual story I want to tell you about, okay? I want to talk about how this sense of being seen and not being seen played into an understanding of my identity that has since allowed poetry to play a very strong role in my life. Okay, so I grew up in an African family. Now, this is in Alberta, but in the confines of my house was in Africa. The food that we ate, the music we listened to, the culture that we experienced, the language that we spoke, all came from Africa, all right? And so my friends were often baffled by things that I had references to inside my house. Outside my house, it was a different story. But I have to tell you, even in my house, there were times in which I would look at this African food and culture and music, and I really would shake my head. I really wasn't entirely sure. How African was my Africa, after all? Like, it didn't always seem very African to me. And that's not just because I was familiar with it in a way that, say, my friends were not, right? I would often ask my friends, when my mom, if she happened to be speaking Creole, that's our language, Creole, if she happened to be speaking that in front of them, I would always ask them, did you understand that? And they would say, huh? No. And I would think, what? How could you not, right? Because it didn't sound that different to me. It didn't sound African to me. Now, you might say, well, of course it didn't to you. You grew up with it, right? So you just had it. And part of that is true. But there's another part that I want to emphasize here that has to do with history. I come from Sierra Leone, as you heard in Angie's introduction. And Sierra Leone is a country whose history is marked by slavery. In fact, you might think of the Atlantic Ocean as a kind of wall or a curtain of slavery from which people were taken. You don't have to look at all the details of the text that I have up there, all right? The general story that I'm telling you here is that people were taken from Africa, often from Sierra Leone, the West Coast, and then they were enslaved in the Americas, and then they spread across the Americas in various states of enslavement, even into Canada, which also had its slavery as well up until 1833. And then some of these people managed to find their way out of enslavement, also ended up in Canada, in Nova Scotia particularly, and because they were still experiencing a kind of ambivalent state of understanding of freedom and enslavement in Canada, they demanded to be returned to Africa. And so they did. They went back to Africa. And they founded Freetown, the capital of Sierra Leone, and they reestablished themselves there in Africa. So it's actually a remarkable story, this triangle that you see in this image. It's a remarkable story of people going through that hideous curtain of what George Eliot Clark calls the crucible of slavery, of going through that hideous curtain, what we also refer to as the door of no return, making their way through that journey and actually coming back to Africa. Incredible journey. But the result of this is that those things that I mentioned to you, our food, our music, our culture, our language, those things get changed as well now. So in terms of food, for example, we did have lots of African foods that my friends were like not only baffled, but slightly disgusted by, for sure. But there were also things like salon salad. We call it salon salad. It's a particular type of salad that is kind of, it belongs to Sierra Leoneans from Freetown, especially to the Creole ethnic group. But this is nothing more than iceberg lettuce with maybe some salmon, some boiled eggs, and baked beans on it. Baked beans? Like, that's bizarre. And in fact, baked beans were something my mom loved to eat. She would regularly have them on Sundays. It was a breakfast food for her. Baked beans and tin sardines she would have, regular basis. This did not strike me as African at all, actually. Baked beans and tin sardines, what? Equally with the music, my parents did listen to African music, but more so, they listened to music that was kind of African-y, that came from the African diaspora, but that was more just pop music. Like, they loved Boney M, definitely. They also, though, loved, songs by Paul Simon, Paul Simon's Graceland, which took South African melodies and rhythms, but, was still Paul Simon. Blondie had this hit in 1980, which they were still listening to in like 1988 or something like that. The Tide is High, this pseudo sort of reggae thing. They loved that stuff. And to me, this did not feel African at all. In terms of culture, Creole from Sierra Leone are actually Christian. They brought that with them when they came back across the Atlantic from the West. And of course, our language is our language, but it also is a kind of a mixed language. So it's a mixture of African indigenous languages as well as European languages, and primarily has English at its base. So England has its stamp on Sierra Leone, which is why, of course, my last name is not African at all. I have an English last name. That's part of that English stamp that is on our country. And part of the reason why, not only that I asked my friends if they understood my parents, if they spoke in Creole, because to me, it just sounded like a form of broken English. It didn't sound like anything foreign at all. But it's also why I was so confused about what is African exactly. None of this feels African to me. It feels stolen, frankly. It feels like it's European, or specifically, it feels like it's English. So I didn't feel as though I had an authentic claim to African anything. Everything felt stolen. And here's where I want to kind of touch on the tragedy of my teenage experiences, because of the branding of Blackness that I had experienced when I grew up, you tend to see everything through that lens. And so I interpreted my family story and my cultural history through the lens of theft, because that is the brand that I was given. And that is really too bad, because it really isn't that these Africans are not African enough and they stole English culture. That's not it at all. It's something far more beautiful and indeed far more poetic. What I couldn't see was the poetry of my history. That is the poetry of this community that was in between. That was not no longer Western and returning to Africa. That is poetic. I'm going to give you some examples here based on the language itself. Okay, let's just talk about Creole, the language Creole. So the word Creole is derived from the word Creole, and Creole is just a mixture of things, right? And this is because we are seen as a mixture because we came back from the West and then we mixed with African cultures, and so didn't quite have that same sort of direct connection to our indigenous heritage in the same way. Remember, the curtain of the Atlantic, the crucible of the slavery, is always in between our historic selves, our indigenous identity, our indigenous past, and then our returned identity, our modern selves. So Creole really is just the word Creole with the LE pulled off. At least that's how I saw it when I was young. A word like beans is binch in Creole. You just add CH to the end of that, right? That doesn't feel like it's another language at all, right? Beans, binch. And to me, that just felt like, yeah, we're just speaking a kind of broken English. It doesn't feel like another language at all. And this final example, I think, really does bring that home, but also can show some poetry. So there's a saying in Creole, adekam, okay, adekam. And this is what we say when we are returning somewhere, when we're on our way back somewhere, okay, adekam. So literally it means I will come. That's literally what it means. But you're saying it to mean I'll be right back, basically, okay? But the literal words are I am coming, okay, or I will come. Those are the literal words. Now, for me, when I was young, this just sounded ridiculous, right? This doesn't sound like another language at all. Just is like a strange anglicized or Africanized version of I. Is just an Africanized version of come. It's not another language at all. That's not what it felt like to me anyway. But the day in there actually is something different. And there's a lot of discussion with linguists about what exactly it is and where it comes from. Some people think that it is derived from a European language, Portuguese, but grammatically it doesn't work that way. Most people agree that it is some sort of indigenous African expression, and that has fused its way into the language. But what I want you to know is the poetry that is in this particular saying. Because when we talk about adekam, we're actually talking about going, is what we're talking about. But interestingly, we don't use the word go in this particular saying, okay? And so when we're saying we're going in this particular way, we're oriented towards returning, in fact, adekam, right? So going is actually coming back. And for me, this makes perfect sense when you think about history as poetry now. So It is the poetry of history that produces returners who don't talk about going, right? Who don't have the word going in their return. They just talk about coming back all the time. Because that vile curtain that separated everything, that curtain was seen as the door of no return. You cross it and you're gone forever, essentially. Going for us cannot be no return because we are the people of returners. And so in a very poetic way, there is no going in the phrase athabascau. There is no going, right? It's all about coming. So in this sense, Creole taught me how to listen to what is not there. Whoa, there's my guy. He liked that, right? Creole taught me to listen to what is not there. When I look at my name even, I understand that there is a history involved in that European name, but I also understand that there is a poetry in the absence of knowing where that name actually comes from. Maybe the name was forced on us. Could be, that often happened. Maybe we stole it. That also happened, by the way. People just chose names for themselves. They just took them. Or maybe we returned to it as the people who are returners. What do I mean by that? Well, let's go to our Albertan Black Cowboys now. Here's a great example. Walter I. Freeman, Black Cowboy. Freeman is a name that many formerly enslaved Africans chose in North America once they escaped from or found themselves freed from enslavement. Okay, so Freeman was a name that they chose. And just think of how powerful that is, that you choose that name. Maybe you used to have the slave master's name and you reject that and you create your own name. So that's not the way in which most of us got our family name, right? We didn't get it because we just took it, yeah. In a sense, maybe they stole it, right? Like maybe Bickersteth was stolen from some other family. Or maybe at the same time, because we're talking about freedom, we're talking about a freeman, maybe they simply returned to what they always had, what they always knew they were. And for me, that is poetry as well. Here is Walter's brand. It is a quarter circle over an inverted F4. Okay, quarter circle over inverted F4 or reverse F4. Now, it's almost impossible to know what the actual meaning of this brand is to Walter Freeman. Okay, we don't know, but we can certainly surmise that F is important in indicating the Freeman part. So the freedom or the freeman that was chosen at some point is central enough that he really wants to put that in there. And I might speculate as a poet, and I am speculating, but the poetry in me wants to say that in reversing the F, he's somehow speaking back to slavery, right? He is emphasizing the freedom, the free in freemen. Who knows, though? In part, I chose to create a font because of what I saw in these cattle brands. I saw the dramatic ways of expressing the poetry of absence, what's not there as poetry. I saw these Black Cowboys already expressing this in their cattle brands. And so I just wanted to accommodate that. Here's another example. This is through naming again. Frederick Hall has two brands. Mostly he uses the one on the left. Again, we've got a quarter circle, but this is over a lazy F followed by an H. Okay, so it's quarter circle, lazy F, H. Then in 1916, he inserts this new one, which is FD bar. Okay, so FD over a bar. This is interesting because it's the only time he actually uses this particular brand. After this, he goes back to the lazy FH one. Now, for me, this is poetry again, because the D in Frederick Hall actually stands for Douglas, okay? And Frederick Douglass Hall was almost certainly named after Frederick Douglass, who was the most important Black abolitionist of his day in the 19th century. Every Black person knew that name, Frederick Douglass in the 19th century. And so there's no doubt in my mind that this man, Frederick Douglass, who was known as a staunch advocate for abolition, who saw slavery ended in his time, and who was probably the most famous Black man of the 19th century as an abolitionist. So he stood for it. It was literally the symbol of freedom. There's no doubt in my mind that Frederick Douglass Hall was named after him. No doubt. And so for me, this is poetry because in and among all of his FHs, he actually slips in this FD. He wants to emphasize this Frederick Douglass, but he just slips it in. And then he goes back to the FHs, the Frederick Halls. So for me, again, I just feel like there's more of that poetry of absence being demonstrated. Here's my final example that I want to give to you. This is Charles Dyson. You might recall him from my first talk. Charlie Dyson's brand is bar over 1 bar 2. Now, I don't know if you remember him, but I will remind you that Charlie Dyson was a blacksmith and so likely produced his own branding iron. And so for that reason, I called him my Black Hephaestus, because he created, like the Greek god of the forge, he created his own divine powers. What I'm trying to say, divine was the word I was struggling for. That was his instrument of poetry, his pen, so to speak, his poetic pen. In the language of brands, bars generally join symbols. They keep them together. Okay, so when we talk about bar U, for example, the U is above the bar, but it goes with the U. It's together with it. Bar K's is actually a funk band from the 70s. I couldn't help myself. I had to put it there. But S bar S shows you the logic of the bar. Okay, so the bottom one you see S bar S. The top shows you what bars tend to do logically, the concept of them. They join the figures together, all right? Now, when I look at Charlie Dyson's brand, I look at it with a poet's eye. And so I say, well, it's possible that we see not a bar that's joining, but we see an equation happening here. 1 minus 2 rather than 1 and 2. 1 minus 2. And you may say, well, why would you think that? Well, curiously, Charlie Dyson married Eliza in 1870. And Eliza Dyson and Charles Dyson are found in all the historical documents from the 1870s right up to the 1920s, in fact. Even after Charles Dyson moved to Alberta from Ontario, he's originally from the US, from Syracuse, New York, moved up to Chatham, Ontario, which was a terminus on the Underground Railroad. And then he moves west to Pincher Creek. And Eliza's with him the whole time. But curiously, in 1901, they got married again. And I thought, that's quite a commitment to love, except that I then discovered that these are 2 different women that he married who happened to be called Eliza. Eliza Jefferson, he first married in 1870 in Ontario, and then Eliza Johnson, he married in 1901 in Alberta. So there were 2 Eliza Dysons. One Eliza died after 1870, and then the second Eliza also died later on, which made me think that, well, maybe what we're seeing here is not so much a 1 bar 2, but it's a kind of poetic way of thinking of the bar as both connecting and subtracting. It's signaling loss and it's signaling love too. It's reminding us of this connection that he had with these 2 Elizas, these 2 women. One, maybe he's the one, minus the 2 Eliza Dysons. Again, it's poetic, but it's how I like to read things. So to wrap up, I want to remind you of this here, the 80s brand. And this is why I find Charles Dyson's, or my poetic interpretation of Charles Dyson, so important. Because in the 80s, Blackness was branded in these very limited ways. And I want to point out that it wasn't only this, okay? There was also, along with criminal and rapist and so on and so forth, there was also the funny sidekick and the musical performer and the athlete and that super cool guy. Yeah. this was also given to Blackness, but I want to argue that even these characters were linked in the background somehow to this guy here. He's also connected to them. Nevertheless, all of these ways of branding Blackness are also ways of denying the humanness of Blackness. They don't allow for that extra dimension that we give to most human beings. Ultimately, I want to say that we don't know what these brands actually mean. Okay, we don't know and we can't know. And perhaps what I'm doing is I'm forcing meaning on them as a poet, or maybe I'm stealing meaning from them as a thief, because that's what I am. But if I did, then I want you to know I chose to be a thief in this case. I chose to steal these things from them. I choose to know these Black men and the women that they loved through the poetry of absence. I choose to do this because I know that through the poetry of absence, we can discover things that you can't otherwise discover. We can counter things that we're not otherwise able to counter. And for sure, I want to emphasize that if it ever comes down to the denial of Black life as authoritative or authentic in itself, or dimensioned, or even just human, I will always, always return that discourse to love, always. And so for me, it is worth making that kind of interpretation. I see I've run out of time, and so I'm just going to stop there, folks. That is how I counter history with poetry. Thank you very much for listening, everyone. I appreciate it.
Oh, thank you so much, Bertrand. That was wonderful. What an expansive, thought-provoking presentation. My head is spinning with ideas. I see Peter Midgley's in on the talk. He's one of your editors. Anyways, I was going to say, yeah, that was wonderful. I didn't see you bringing it back at the end to poetry as thief. That was all very inspiring. Thank you. So I'm going to open it. If anyone has questions, we have a couple minutes, or we can take a couple minutes in the Q&A. And I'm going to start with a question. If you'll forgive a tiny bit of long-windedness, we're considering this program and how it's of value. And I was thinking back to that moment I contacted you, because it's one of my favorite things to do. Jolene Armstrong in our committee had heard you on Sheila Rogers' program, the not the next chapter, the next chapter, and she was interested. She looked into your work and then told us about you, and then we all looked into your work, and then I had that moment where I get to contact you and I get to say, I know you don't know me and you probably don't know about our program, but we would like to support you to do more of what you do. Like if you come and inspire our students and mentor them, or any of the, aspiring writers around, we give you this gift of time to work on your work because we think it's valuable. And what a nice thing to be able to say to someone. And I remember you being quite surprised. so I'd like if you could say a little bit, shocked. And if you could say a little bit about, your reaction at that moment and your expectations versus how this 8 months has been with us, and what's the value of the program. I would like to hear.
I think that's a brilliant question. So I was completely shocked with that when I saw that email. I don't remember if I told you this, Angie, but I had just been engaged with two of my other work colleagues about the way in which work drains us of the things that we really want to do, and how we have to find ways of balancing our life with these other pursuits that we have that are meaningful for us in our lives, and that we need to just sit down and figure out how to do this. And I'm not exaggerating one iota when I say your email came in the middle of that conversation. And so as one of my colleagues was talking, I stopped him and I said, wait, guys, you're not going to believe what I'm reading. I don't even understand what I'm reading. And I read the email to them and they're like, what? They both came around to my desk and were looking at the email. We were all in shock. We could not believe it. This was exactly what I was looking for. It was exactly what I was looking for. How can I be a better educator by fulfilling that part of me that needs to be a writer? How can I do that and balance it out? And that's precisely what this program allows. Now, I don't know if other people are aware of how other writers in residencies go, but there are a lot of ancillary what's the word, duties, I'll say, that often go along with it. Okay, so I was on the board for the Distinguished Writers Program at the U of C, and they have a writers in residency program there too. And we make that writer in resident do all kinds of things. Like they have to do all kinds of give talks and go to the community and do this and write reports and all kinds of things. So I remember that part of my response to you was, okay, like, what do I have to do? What are the things that are, what's on the agenda for me? And you're like, well, you got to, support the students and do your writing. And I was like, oh, what? that sounds like a dream. And this is exactly what it is. It is a dream. I will tell you this, just to round off my response to you, Angie. It's been so much of a dream. I mean, I love working with the students, without a doubt. I love being able to work on my own stuff. It took me probably 4 months to be able to wrap my mind around actually just being able to write and to shed that guilt of you're not working, you have to just write. But once I got into the rhythm, what I did to get into the rhythm was every morning, I thank the universe that I have this opportunity to just be able to work on my own material and support other writers as well. And that gives me the inspiration and the energy to move forward and write. So I've been able to work on a lot of my own writing. I completed my second manuscript, which was just like sitting around forever. I finally just sent it off to my publisher last year. I completed a play that I've sent off. I basically finished the first rough draft of the Black Cowboys poetry collection. I've been able to complete the alphabet of the font that I want to work on, and that alone takes so much time. And so this has been enormous for me to be able to do that. I've been able to work on the book project for Athabasca University Press, which is basically this that I've just given to you. It's a longer version of this presentation I gave. And how else would I have been able to even start half of that without this opportunity? So this has been not only a joy, but it has allowed me to reconnect to those things that help me to remember to be grateful as well for things. And I am so grateful. I'm grateful for the opportunity. I'm grateful for being able to engage with the students. And I look forward to whoever gets this opportunity again next. Thank you, thank you, thank you. You're muted. Yeah, I'm sure whatever you said was beautiful.
I said we are also very grateful for all the help all the ideas you've shared with our faculty and staff and students, and for especially sharing these presentations and that you've done all this work that's going to be out in the world during the time. So we're very grateful, and all kinds of expressions of gratitude are coming up in the chat, and I'll just read you Manage. She says, many thanks, Bertrand, for your thought-provoking and sobering talk. Another fascinating presentation. Your residency has contributed a lot to our unique writer-in-residence program and faculty and humanities social science community. So I think with that, we'll sign off, and let's just make sure. I think all the notes coming up are just people saying thank you. Oh, there is one comment. Thank you for your both talks. Your approach to Black history is so exciting, and the way you read the brands and branding is innovative. Amazing talk. And what do you have? Here's a question. What do you have any hopes or expectations for what people will do with your font?
Yeah, that's actually a great question.
That's
so I don't have specifics in mind, but what I do hope and want is that people know where it came from and that they just use it. Because really what I want is I want these imaginative designs to be out in the world again. I don't want them to be forgotten and unused. And so if they are texting WTF, LOL, whatever, that's great with me. I think that's fantastic. If it inspires them to go and look up the history of Black cowboys, that's a bonus. But really what I want to do is just bring these designs back to life. That's what I want to do.
Excellent. And Kevin Soul has also asked, you mentioned authenticity in your, you mentioned authenticity in connection to your identity in the talk. Has your view of authenticity and whether people need it to validate identity changed over time? As your view of authenticity, yes, and whether people need it to validate, yes?
Yes, that is definitely, and that's too long of an answer to deal with here. But yeah, it's changed in multiple ways. I will just say that, as you heard in the talk, when I started as a teenager, I struggled with my identity, and I saw all sides of my identity as inauthentic. My Albertan self, my African self, inauthentic. I have since come to realize that, you know, identity is a paradoxical thing. It comes from around us, but also we make it as well. So people can try to tell you who you are, but ultimately you can be the author of your own identity, ultimately. And so for me, you know, you want to say that there's no such thing as black cowboys, whatever. I'm wearing an invisible black cowboy hat right now. It's there. I know it. I feel it. I don't care if you don't see it. I'm a black cowboy. Okay, so whatever. So to that extent, I do feel as though you can be the author of your own identity. And I hope that people can feel empowered to be the author of their own identity. We don't need other people to determine what authenticity is for us. Maybe identity is a little trickier, but authenticity, you don't need other people for that. And yeah, that's the short answer. I mean, there's so many more things to get into there for sure.
That's an interesting question. I had to read it over a couple times to even get my head around it. And then, but I imagine that
Yeah.
will be reflected in your collection, next collection too, your answer.
Correct. That's right.
Excellent. Yeah. Well, thank you very much to everyone who came and listened. And thanks again to Joanna for hosting technologically. And thanks to the FHSS and to Canada Council for their support. And thank you most of all to Bertrand. Have a great day, everybody.
Thank you.